Coming up, a Big 12 coach takes a jab that a lot of SEC fans may not like. We'll tell you all about it next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. Good to have you with us. Hope you're getting ready for a happy Independence Day tomorrow. Now, y'all don't burn your houses down. I feel the need to always say that. We got these fairly liberated fireworks laws again around most of the SEC country here. You got to be careful with that kind of stuff.
You definitely do, and you also got to be careful when you're making comments about SEC defenses. And you're a Big 12 head coach. It should be a fun day today.
Yeah, let's dive into that. Item number one here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So we take a look at Oklahoma coach Lincoln Riley, who goes on the ESPNU radio show, hosted, I guess today it was Taylor Zarzar, I believe that's how you say his name, and Danny Kanell. Of course, many SEC fans pretty familiar with Kanell because of his SEC trolling in the past. Well, do you put this in the category of SEC trolling? From Oklahoma coach Lincoln Riley, Danny Kanell explains it on Twitter. He says, Lincoln Riley on the show just now says, if you throw Georgia, which is the team that Oklahoma played in the Rose Bowl, in the Big 12 every year, there is no way they are a top 5 defense in the country. That's the insinuation from Lincoln Riley there, that Georgia's not going to be able to stop big-time SEC, or I should say big-time Big 12 offenses week in and week out in that league. I think that if he's saying that about Georgia, it's probably fair to say that he's saying that about other SEC defenses like maybe Alabama and others. Riley later on, I guess maybe even during the interview, frankly I didn't hear it, I just saw the tweet, but in that interview and certainly in subsequent tweets, Riley tried to explain this wasn't taking a shot at Georgia. It was simply a compliment towards the offense in the Big 12. Mike, I'm going to tell you that I don't think that does anything to make SEC fans, certainly Georgia fans in particular here, feel any different about this. When the Big 12 and the SEC get together, it's about various ways of life. It's about feuding ways of life. Big 12 football and SEC football, they just don't value the same kind of stuff. And while we sort of typically think of, SEC kind of, hating the ACC sometimes because of the in-state rivals, or hating the Big 10 because that's where some other big-time programs are, like Urban Meyer and Ohio State, there's a special kind of feud that the SEC has with the Big 12 because these two leagues just value different things. And Lincoln Riley's words on this radio show this morning is the latest example of that.
No, and I couldn't agree with you more. And there's so many I can nitpick this. I can go 10 different ways about what's wrong with him making these comments. First of all, why is Lincoln Riley talking about Georgia's defense right now, July 3rd, going into – well, why are you talking about it right now? Let's not talk about what happened 6 months ago. Let's also highlight the fact that these are two teams, and this is why I made the comment on Twitter that this is dumb to compare, because these two teams are built for completely different situations. I don't think Big 12 offenses are bad. I don't necessarily think Big 12 defenses are that bad. I think they're built differently to play in the Big 12 than Georgia is to play in the SEC. They're built differently. They're recruited differently. They're game planning differently. So to take one game, if you're Lincoln Riley, and say, boy, this many points were scored, to say that Georgia's defense wouldn't be able to excel in the Big 12, to me, it's just a big slap in the face. He can come out and say, hey, I didn't mean it. I meant it as a compliment to the Big 12. But sometimes you kill two birds with one stone, and by kind of talking up your group, you talk down about another one.
Well, I will say this, that Big 12 style of play is not winning any more national championships.
Exactly.
Vince Young got one for his Texas team back in, I guess, 2005 or whatever, but the SEC established its dominance after that, and that's the brand of football that wins national championships. Even when it's not an SEC team, it's still SEC-style defenses that win this thing here. I mean, take a look at Clemson here. When Chad Morris was the offensive coordinator there, offensively they were doing a lot of stuff that I think could be described as pretty similar to what the Big 12 teams do offensively, but it's still that Brent Venables SEC-style defense. It's still big athletic defensive linemen. You are not winning a national championship without that. So if you want to hear me throw the token gesture out there of Oklahoma was very good, they were. Oklahoma had a really good offense, they did. But you know what? Those kinds of offenses are only made to go so far. And in the rigors of a playoff, when you have to beat a good team and then turn around and beat another good team, if you've got the inferior defense, you're not winning a national championship. You're just not.
That's the way it is, too. And it's about being a well-rounded football team, right? You can point at, listen, this offense is here, this offense is there. Well, y'all can go to my Twitter page right now and see every argument you could possibly want to between SEC and Big 12 fans. But the bottom line is, the better brand of football has been winning. The better brand of football, in my eyes, is SEC football. So you can compare it all you want to and say, boy, we're offensive heavy. What has that gotten you? Where have you gotten, being offensive heavy? I think it's just so out of my mind for Lincoln Riley with a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback and a month to prepare against Georgia, come out and score 50 points or whatever it was and say, boy, we were really good.
Right.
What is it getting you? I think he needs to take a step back.
I mean, for me, the pipeline that fuels the Big 12 here is Texas high school football. And I think there is a brand of football that exists at the high school level in Texas that's obsessed with offense. You see the best players get picked up by the offensive coaches all the time. It is ingrained into the fabric of the society out there. And as I said, Oklahoma is sort of the flagship program right now for the Big 12. They're very much kind of, in line with all that kind of stuff. Whereas in SEC country, in the SEC, it's more about the defensive lineman here. Could not be more different. Now, if Bob Stoops was sitting here, the longtime Oklahoma coach who's not there anymore, or a guy that's been an Oklahoma fan for a long time, he'd rightly point out, Oklahoma's beaten some SEC teams. Beat Auburn in the Sugar Bowl. Beat Alabama in a Sugar Bowl too. Yeah. So Oklahoma's beaten some SEC teams. This is not to sort of trash Oklahoma and say they couldn't handle the SEC. They'd probably win their share of games. All I'm saying is the Big 12 has picked the brand of football it wants to play. The SEC has picked the brand of football it wants to play. And one brand of football is winning a lot more national championships. And oh yeah, by the way, to add to that, the one thing that you have to sort of factor in here when you make these comparisons between Oklahoma and Georgia, it's the commitment to recruiting here as well. Georgia and, a ton of 4- and 5-star former recruits. Alabama, Auburn, much the same way. Oklahoma just not as devoted to that side of the sport, not as devoted to recruiting. So when you want to talk about the sort of rigors of week in, week out competition, you have to factor the fact that the Big 12 is a weak league for recruiting. And there's no better proof of that than the fact that they don't send anybody to the NFL. I mean, go back and watch this spring's NFL draft. How many Big 12 guys even got drafted?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And that's what makes it mind-boggling to me. And that's why I hate when we take one game. It's like, hey, let's take one game at the end of the year. Lincoln Riley had 30 days to prepare for Georgia's defense. Georgia only needed one half to answer that and say, you know what, you're not doing that anymore. And so I think that's where things get lost in the shuffle. And we take one game at the end of the season between a Big 12 team and an SEC team and say, oh, look what happened. It's about the brand of football. Georgia is prepared to play an SEC schedule for a reason. They have the defensive front seven. They have the running game. They have the big offensive line. The SEC can fold back into that Big 12 style of play and put their foot down when they need to.
Galen Jacobs in our comment section on Facebook says, I'd love to hear what Kirby Smart has to say about this. Well, we don't have the benefit of hearing Kirby in real time in the moment responding to what Lincoln Riley said. But as far as the issue of his defense facing that high-powered Oklahoma offense back during the Rose Bowl, that's the game that starts all of this. Georgia wins in the Rose Bowl against the Sooners, goes on to play in the national championship game. Well, Kirby Smart offered his explanation on that week of why it was that Georgia was dominated so much in the first half, only to see things get a bit better during the second half. Here's what Kirby Smart said back in January about the tale of two halves from the Georgia defense against Oklahoma.
We got more pressure. We called the game a little more aggressively. I thought the kids tackled a little better. We still didn't tackle real good in the second half, but it was better than we did in the first half. I really just think they settled down. It's hard to put a finger on why they weren't settled early. I know you could say, well, it was the Rose Bowl. Well, it was Baker Mayfield. Yeah, we knew all that. And our team has got to play big in big moments and can't play what we call rat trap and have mental errors. And I thought in the first half, man, we had a lot of mental errors and just really not indicative of who we are defensively. And I thought they did a much better job of playing our style of defense. And it was not a lot of schematic changes as much as it was getting more comfortable with what Oklahoma was doing.
So interesting there from Kirby Smart, he says, and I know we obviously talked about this a lot during the time. It's been a while since we've heard that it wasn't about schematic changes. It was just about doing what Georgia does better. Now, I don't want to quite let Georgia off the hook too easy on that it's more than just mental errors that allow Oklahoma to score the points they scored. Oklahoma was really doing something offensively, particularly running the football in the first half. But Georgia using its physicality to its advantage in the second half, I think leaned on the Sooners, and it did become sort of a tale of two halves there at that point in time. But pretty clearly in the first half of the Rose Bowl, I mean, everybody has to admit, even a guy wearing red and black like me today, everybody has to admit that Oklahoma was having some success there.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think 98 Sports Talk brings up a good point. Kirby has better things to do than worry about Lincoln Riley is talking about right now. And really, that's my biggest point in this whole deal. Lincoln Riley can come in after like I said, a 30 days to prepare against Georgia's defense with a Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback and say whatever he wants to. That's Lincoln Riley's right. what is July? Aren't you
Yeah.
worried about what's coming up in the season? This is
Right.
year 2 for him as a coach, and he better be preparing for what's going on in the Big 12.
I kind of agree with you. Now, I didn't hear the interview here. Most people didn't, to be honest with you. But what it almost seems like, it almost comes across the way that it's been portrayed here as Lincoln Riley bragging about scoring a lot of points against Georgia, as if winning the game wasn't the objective here, wasn't the name of the game. It almost, in a weird way, seems like that's what he's bragging about here, as opposed to what is supposed to be important, which is winning the game.
Yeah, no, like I said, there's a ton of different angles to go at with this. There's a ton of different ways to talk about what Lincoln Riley said, but I think that it's completely out of context. I don't think you should be talking about it right now. I don't think you should be talking about it, period. And the fact that he's going to go in and say these things at this point in time, to me, becomes even that much more of a head scratcher.
All right, let me get a few comments in our Facebook comment section, then we'll move on to talk about the Alabama Crimson Tide for a moment. Lawrence Robinson said the rest of the Big 12 has not had a good record against the SEC. Oklahoma has a good record against the league, but the rest of the conference does not. We have seen some Big 12 teams losing to SEC teams in years past, although I guess we've seen a couple of the opposite as well. Eddie Joseph Leverett, though, says Oklahoma wouldn't be a top 10 team at all if it had to play in the SEC. And I'm not going to go quite that far. I mean, I think Oklahoma would certainly win its share of games against anybody. It's a good team. But I do believe that it is invested in a brand of football at the highest levels of all, national championship level. It's just inferior. It's inferior. Good team, scare you to death when you play them, but eventually it's not going to win the national championship. They don't have enough talent, and they're not committed enough to defense.
Yeah, and I also have a hard time thinking that Baker Mayfield's style of play last year at Oklahoma, or whatever style of play they want to talk about, have a hard time believing that makes it all the way through the SEC schedule. I really do. And that's just, maybe that's me being an SEC homer, but I see what happened to Shea Patterson, see what happened to Chad Kelly, see what happened to Nick Fitzgerald. I see these quarterbacks that are extending plays the way Baker Mayfield can in the Big 12, getting hit under the chin, and that SEC defenses week in and week out. I don't think it happens the same way. I don't think he makes it all the way through the season healthy.
Yeah, I think his status as a former walk-on, as a sort of average speed, average size, I think that is going to be exploited by defenses a lot more in a league like the SEC. He's still going to put up yards and numbers and points. Did that against Georgia. That's going to be exploited a lot more. I think you see the same thing in the NFL. I think it's dumb that the Cleveland Browns sort of fell in love with him because of the numbers that he put up, thinking this is going to be sort of a once-in-a-generation type performer here. But the comp for guys that look like Mayfield succeeding against the most elite defensive competition, honestly, there's not a lot of examples of that. It's great to do that in a pillow fight league like the Big 12. It's going to be much more difficult to do that at the NFL level, certainly, where they take defense a lot more seriously.
I mean, there's been guys that have done it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Johnny Manziel made it through the year. That was great. Cam Newton, all 6'6", 260 pounds or whatever, he made it through. He's built like a tank. Like, he did those things in the SEC. But over the course of the long run, we have seen guys, and I brought this up on Twitter a minute ago, we have seen guys like Will Grier look a lot better. We have seen guys like we think Kyler Murray will look a lot better in some of these other leagues in their passing statistics.
By the way, Kirby Smart's daddy here on the YouTube comment section says, praise the Lord for people like Mike Johnson. How about that?
we got a
lot of dads. I don't know if you know this, but there was on my program, Dog Nation Daily, the other morning, there was a BA's daddy that showed up. So you got a BA's daddy now. You got a Mike Johnson's daddy. You got Kirby Smart's daddy. We got a lot of patriarchs showing up in the YouTube comment section.
I'm thankful for all of them, man. I'm glad y'all are here.
All right, let's move on here. Item number 2 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. Another provocative statement made from, for me at least anyway, a pretty surprising source here. I am talking about Tim Brando, longtime commentator, had a radio show for a long time, was on the CBS halftime stuff on that network that televised those SEC football games for a long time. This is a guy that knows the SEC, and I'm going to presume here a guy that loves the SEC. But one thing he does not necessarily love is the way that some in the media apparently treat Alabama about making it back to the college football playoff. He uses a pretty hot-button word here, privileged the Crimson Tide are. Here's what he says in the Paul Feinbaum show, as tweeted out by Feinbaum himself, or whoever runs Feinbaum's account. There's absolutely no way in hell Alabama doesn't get in the playoff, Tim Brando says. And don't tell me they're not privileged. They'll shame Georgia's schedule, but not Alabama's. It's sickening and pathetic, but nobody wants to take on Nick Saban. Do you know Tim Brando? He feels to me like the last person that would be like going in this much on Saban, Alabama being privileged. I mean, how does this land with you?
This to me lands, and this is the Bama coming out of me, but it lands unconnected. Like it really does. Do you know how many questions I get on a daily basis? Look at my Twitter timeline right now about Alabama's schedule. I don't know what this guy's talking about. Listen, I like Tim Brando, but when you do read his Twitter feed, it is kind of abrasive the way he comes off on Paul Feinbaum. And listen, I have no doubt that Alabama gets pushed around in a couple of different ways because of what they bring to TV or whatever. But I mean, when you ask people, let's talk to a guy like Kirk Herbstreit, who admitted last year before that he was like, I'd love to see the Ohio State go in, but Alabama has a better football team at this point, and that's why I just think it's a little bit empty from Tim Brando, and I think in a lot of different ways I disagree with him, not only because I'm a Bama fan, but because I just feel like it's unplugged to me.
Well, I don't have a problem with the Alabama schedule. I don't. I think that kind of stuff is kind of overplayed. Here's what I do have to admit, though, that Alabama is at least privileged in this one regard, or they've gotten the benefit of the doubt in this one regard. They now have 2 years that you can point to where they made the national championship game, or in 2017's version, the playoff, by unconventional means.
Right.
They lost to LSU in 2011, got the chance of the rematch. Did not win the SEC in 2017 in a playoff that was supposed to be designed to favor conference champions over non-conference champions. And, they get into the playoff, they eventually win the national championship. I give them credit. They won those games in both those years to sort of validate that choice, but that is a level of gaining the benefit of the doubt that a lot of other programs could not, be granted here. So,
right.
Alabama, certainly, if you want to argue about them being privileged, that's one thing. But it's hard for me to listen that somehow there's some sort of stern judgment against Alabama when they've been granted gifts a couple of times on a couple of national championships. By conventional means, 2 of Nick Saban's national championships were sort of earned in sort of an unusual fashion.
Well, I think that SEC fans or national, college football fans as a whole need to decide what it is. Do we want teams to play a tough schedule? Let's take the out-of-conference games out of it. Do we want teams to play a tough schedule? I think absolutely. Anybody would say, hey, listen, we want teams to play a tough schedule. So, with Alabama and Georgia having the same loss last year, does Georgia get the benefit of the doubt because they're in a weaker, division or, that side of the conference? I think that would be unfair to Alabama.
But hold on now. Georgia beat, and this is not a Georgia-Alabama thing, but Georgia beat an Auburn team that beat Alabama. So this is more than just a weaker conference here, or a weaker division here. This is a Georgia team that did what the selection committee, when they established the playoff, said was going to be sort of a defining criteria, winning the SEC. Alabama's had 2 national championships where it didn't win the SEC. There is at least some level of privilege that comes along with that.
But you'll follow along the same road with me that Bama and Georgia had the same losses last year. Because Georgia played in the Eastern Division and Bama played in the Western Division, Bama didn't get that shot as a rematch. So, we want teams to play tough schedules. We want teams to do all this, and then we're going to dock them for losing a rivalry game on the road by 14 points or whatever it is to Auburn. I don't think that would have been fair either.
Well, one thing that I will agree with you on, I don't think that Alabama has anything to apologize for with its schedule. This is a year where on paper it seems like Alabama's playing the easiest schedule I can remember it playing.
Yeah.
But it's not its fault that Louisville's no good. I mean,
Right,
Louisville had Lamar Jackson last year.
Yeah, I agree.
Lamar Jackson's still at Louisville. That feels like a marquee game, the kind of thing we'd be circling on our calendars right now. As it stands, minus Lamar Jackson, I've really got no interest in 30-point favorite Alabama week 1 against Louisville. But year before that, it was Florida State, which on paper looked like a great game. The year before that, it was USC, which on paper looked like a great game. I mean, Alabama has very little to apologize for when it comes to its non-conference scheduling. They were doing these out-of-conference big showdowns before that was cool. I'll beef with you on certain aspects of Alabama's treatment, but I am not. I'm not going to complain about the Alabama schedule whatsoever.
Yeah, and that's the thing for me, and that's why it's so kind of out of touch for me. The word I keep using when I talk about Tim Brando is it just seems out of touch for me. I don't know at what point you couldn't have made the argument for Alabama in those circumstances. Yes, I mean, they have been gifted a couple of opportunities, but I don't like the word gifted. I think they earned those opportunities by winning every other game they were asked to win.
We are talking a lot about that Iron Bowl loss that Alabama had to Auburn. When that happened, Nick Saban sort of already began the politicking. Maybe it was privilege in some people's regard that Alabama worked its way in the playoff, but Nick Saban saw the opportunity right the moment the Iron Bowl ended right there in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Here was the case that Saban made then to see his team get into the playoff.
I think this team deserves the opportunity to get in the playoff by what they've been able to accomplish and what they've been able to do. Certainly not maybe in this game, but I think the team we play tonight is a very good football team and probably one of the best teams in the country. They've won 11 games. Not very many teams are able to do that. And I really don't know what all the scenarios might be where we would have an opportunity to do it. I'd certainly like to see this team get the opportunity to do it, and I think they deserve it.
So the one thing that Alabama does have going for it there, and you hear Nick Saban make the case for why it was supposed to be in the playoff, once it gets there, it wins. Compare that here, the opposite to Ohio State. I mean, listen, you and I went round and round on this back in December about Alabama or Ohio State. I think there was, arguments being made for both sides. Ultimately, I think one of the things that hurt Ohio State was it had been given the benefit of the doubt the year before and just got trounced by Clemson.
Yeah.
So as long as you're Nick Saban, Alabama, and you win once you get these privilege opportunities, it's sort of tough to complain too much. But when you're Ohio State, you get picked over Penn State to go to the playoff in a year which Penn State was the Big Ten champion, and then you presumably get beat about the head and face by Clemson at that point in time. It's really hard to come back the following year and say, hey, put us in the playoff again.
Yeah, and just to kind of sum up the topic too, I don't know that there is a team out there that can really have a gripe against other teams about non-conference schedule, especially in the SEC. I mean, and it stinks to say that. I think there's a reason it's scheduled that way, but everybody in the SEC has those opponents that they're not proud of every year. And it goes on. And listen, I had this conversation with an Oklahoma fan earlier. It's, hey, listen, they're talking about Alabama playing Mercer. You guys schedule Tulane, schedule Army, schedule UTEP. I mean, it is what it is. It happens all over the country.
All right, we're going to talk some Florida here in a moment. Let me run through a bunch of comments before we get there, though. Grindhard, an Auburn fan, taking issue with what Nick Saban just said there. How could he say that after getting smacked by 2 touchdowns in that game? I mean, it does take a good bit of hubris. And Saban's defense, I mean, the argument worked, but to pivot right away to we should be in the playoff after you're licking your wounds against your in-state rival.
He's politicking.
There is a level of politicking going on there. There really is.
Yeah, I mean, it honestly is kind of crazy to hear Nick Saban go about it that way because you usually never hear him kind of step out. I guess he's never really put in the position usually to have to step out, but he did flip a complete 180 and start to say, hey, listen, let's put our resume up against anybody.
Erica Allen in the YouTube comment section thought I was defending Alabama too much. She says, you sound like an Alabama fan. Well, that's the last thing I want to sound like. Joshua Rogers also on YouTube says, Ohio State could have been the playoff last year. Losing to Iowa was embarrassing. And listen, this is one of those 50-50 arguments. If we were doing like Big Ten Country Live, we'd have 1,000 people in the comment section arguing the exact opposite of this. Trust me, there were plenty of Ohio State fans that thought they had a very justifiable argument to be.
Yeah, and I don't think they didn't. I think it was, hey, who did they play? Who valued what? I think it came down to comparing the losses between Ohio State and Alabama last year, and Alabama's loss in a rivalry game, against Auburn, who was a top 5 team in the country, just looked better than the Ohio State's loss.
Jamie Blanton says Alabama is very privileged. Nick must have done some really hard work politically. There's no reason that a team that doesn't win its division conference gets a nod in a 4-team playoff. I could understand an 8-team playoff. Don't make the argument, well, they won either. They never should have been there, so it wasn't earned. I do sort of agree with the last part of this, that in the way that most championships are earned, Alabama has not earned its 2011 and 2017 national championships. I don't dispute what Jamie's saying there. But if it comes back around here in 2018, where it's also another kind of on the fence case, is this one of those things of be careful not going back to the well too many times and asking for sort of a special case, almost like a sponsor's exemption into the playoff?
Right.
I mean, is this one of those things you can't ask for that too much?
I think you have to be careful with it. And obviously, Bama doesn't want to lose any games and put themselves in that circumstance either. But I will approach Jamie with the same kind of scenario that Bama was put in last year. If South Carolina does lose in week 3 or whatever it is to Georgia, and then runs the table, beats a number 1 Clemson team at the end of the year, is able to do some crazy things, but doesn't get that shot at the SEC title game because of that loss to Georgia early in the year, you can't tell me that South Carolina fans aren't going to be asking to be put in the playoff.
I think that Shane Higgins got a really interesting point about Alabama being privileged. This is on the Facebook comment section. Going back to 2011, now Shane is an LSU fan. He says, Bama had to sit at home and root for LSU to beat Georgia back in 2011. In addition, they got 40-plus days to rest while the division championship risked loss and injury. Bama twice has been rewarded with rest and a rematch. That's a really interesting point, that when you get to be in the playoff without having to play in the SEC championship, in a lot of ways, that's a nice little reward for you. I mean, it's kind of nice to think that you can get in without having to earn it in that December football game, because you are more rested.
Especially for a Bama team that was as dinged up as they were last year. I mean, you're talking about a Bama team that was as injured as they had been for years, prior to that. And so I won't refute that. It's not like Bama can sit back and say, oh, we know what we're doing, we're going to lose on purpose. They would have never done that. It's just something that came along with it, and Bama ends up getting healthy, and being able to play a couple of extra linebackers down there in the Sugar Bowl against Clemson, and the results came out to be what they were.
All right, let's do item number 3 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. There's been a lot of talk this, last few weeks about some of those 2018 signees, many of which already on their campuses. I mean the summer enrollees here. A couple stragglers get a lot of attention on message boards. An example of that may be coming from one of the biggest Florida signees of all, from Mike's hometown, by the way, of Pensacola. I'm talking about the 4-star wide receiver Jacob Copeland, who, as 24/7 Sports reports, is now officially on campus. I thought Thomas Goldkamp kind of summed up this situation here pretty succinctly when he writes, "After a few nervous days, Florida fans can rest easy. The rest of the team's 2018 signees have safely made it to campus, meaning the entire signing class is now on board. Wide receiver Jacob Copeland, a guy we've talked about a lot, by the way, was the last player to be officially confirmed as enrolled, and the delay in confirming he was good to go had left many fans uneasy." Now, I won't pretend to be an expert on Copeland's situation here, but I'm assuming, like a lot of these are, dotting I's and crossing T's when it comes to academics here. And it seems like in this internet age, when message boards are very popular and sort of 24/7, 365-day-a-year coverage of college football is a lot more prevalent than it used to be, these kind of stories just get a lot more attention than they once did. It's not just Florida. There are a lot of SEC teams that are sort of still waiting for that final guy to sort of show up and be good to go here. Is this too much? Does Jacob Copeland deserve privacy? He gets no privacy, by the way, the moment he arrives on campus. But in these sort of final days of his sort of high school life here, getting that transcript cleaned up or whatever's going on here, should he be able to do this without the watchful eye of the media?
He should, but I think that Jacob Copeland, in my opinion, and listen, you guys know I'm player first, right? I'm all about players' rights and being able to do what they want to. But in my opinion, Jacob Copeland crossed that bridge a long time ago when he put out the 2.5-minute commitment video where he's riding four-wheelers through the streets and doing all this. I'm sorry.
Wish we had that in our
I'm
system
sorry,
right
but it's true. And we're going to talk, in a minute about commitment videos that I don't like, and it's Bama guy. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But Jacob Copeland gave up the right to not be in the public eye when he put that video out.
The way that our video system works is the stuff we've shown you before doesn't just sort of like magically stay in there.
Right.
You have to load it in every day to have it ready to go. That we showed it for you when it happened. That Jacob Copeland commitment video, he's got no shirt on. Those motorcycles are driving around in a circle. It looks like a Mad Max movie.
Yeah.
At that point in time, you have sort of
crossed that bridge.
Voluntarily given away your privacy. I don't necessarily disagree with that.
And I think it's different too, because when I was going to school, listen, I didn't even know half the signing class. I mean, it's just the way, you had to wait on that magazine to come out to see who all signed on the dotted line. Rivals was just kind of getting started. Bama Online was just kind of getting started. It's one of those things where nowadays it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and you have to be ready for that attention. So while I would love to kind of go back in time and wish all these guys could get away with some of the things they did 10 years ago, listen, I had to deal with the change in the times too. There's stuff people, that the football players got away with 50 years ago that I couldn't get away with, and it's just a sign of what we're doing right now in the spotlight on these guys.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, look, for fans, they're obviously going to be really curious about what's going on here because some of these guys end up not making it. And, the defense on a guy like Copeland is, well, you technically don't have to be there until, right about now anyway. I mean, practice doesn't start for another couple of weeks, so the true deadline may not be, the sort of artificial deadline we have in our mind. Most of these guys show up in early June, but fans are going to be curious about this. I mean, look, Florida is not going to be a top flight team in 2018 without help from its wide receiver core. To even win games in 2018, Florida likely needs a lot of wide receivers. As we pointed out yesterday, David Wunderlich from Gator Country had those numbers about it's the only position that Florida's out-recruited Georgia and the only position that anybody in the SEC has out-recruited Georgia. That includes Jacob Copeland.
Yeah.
So if he's got, some sort of Algebra 2 score that he's still waiting on here, that's bad news for the Gators. And as much as I want to give him that privacy, and listen, Georgia's got guys in the same boat here. So this is not just a picking on Florida thing. As much as I want to give them that privacy, natural curiosity sort of knows no bounds here. And there is going to be a curiosity of if Copeland's not there, Florida fans are going to be wondering why it isn't. And there is going to be a reporter somewhere that steps in the void and provides the information.
And that's just the way it is. I mean, there's always going to be somebody willing to do it, and there's always going to be people that want to read what's going on with Jacob Copeland. And the good news is that now Jacob Copeland's enrolled. He's on campus. He can get whatever tutoring help he needs to. He can do whatever he needs to. It's a clean slate now that he's down in Florida.
How about your boy Cliff Nelson in our YouTube comment section? Day before the 4th of July, he says he's already throwing a few back and got the grill smoking
it's his birthday
going on.
Yeah, it's Cliff's birthday.
Wait, how many birthdays does he have?
Well, he said tomorrow is my birthday yesterday.
We were talking the other day about his birthday.
Now he's getting a lot of happy birthdays and he's throwing a few back.
Listen, Cliff, the LSU fan, he's living like Mardi Gras. He's got like 4 birthdays. I I swear to you, we can go back and look at the comment section. We said happy birthday to Cliff like 3 days ago.
Yeah.
You can't be calling every day your birthday and not act like we're going to notice.
Cliff's got two Mardi Gras in his life. He's celebrating all week. I love it, though.
But listen, no doubt. Happy birthday to you all, and glad to see you getting it going with the grill and the cold ones and whatever you're doing here for your 4th of July week. We're certainly glad you're spending some time with us here today on SEC Country Live. Let me do item number 4 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I have to admit, I think this is a pretty juicy story. We're actually in a kind of a boom time here for somewhat provocative statements showing up on Twitter. Another example of this. So there is I'm trying to set the stage for all of this. There is a reporter who's talking about the nation's #1 inside linebacker, Nakobe Dean, and his potential relationship with Clemson and what Clemson coaches have told him. Well, this gets the attention of Leon O'Neal, a guy who I think is going to be a great player for Texas A&M.
I agree.
This is a nice sort of late addition of the 2018 class. O'Neal had gotten a lot of recruiting attention from not just the Aggies, but also Clemson as well. And something about the promise that Nakobe Dean allegedly got from Clemson seemed to remind Leon O'Neal of something that had been said about him. Apologies for the vulgarity here, but here is Leon O'Neal on Twitter responding to a report about Nakobe Dean. TigerNet.com says, Clemson linebacker target Nakobe Dean has been impressive so far, and this is at the opening. He told me that Clemson defensive coordinator Brent Venables told him his first play at Clemson would be a blitz. Leon O'Neal, the Texas A&M signee, says, he told me the same thing. And then you can see the expletive that I won't read there. I mean, how much does this go on? Like all the time, right?
No, I think it happens all the time. And it stinks. We talked yesterday about how these coaches massage the facts and they want to tell you what you want to hear, and it happens. I mean, I can think of a couple of different names of guys that probably got this treatment when I was at Alabama, and it's just the nature of the beast. Hey, you're going to get carries in the first game we play next year. Hey, you're going to catch a pass in the first game next year. Some of these guys were players that didn't even end up playing more than a couple of years at Alabama before transferring, but that first game, they got a couple of catches and they got a couple of touches. And so it is interesting to look at, especially from the defensive perspective. Hey, you're going to get a blitz. Like, I don't know, what you're going to be able to do when we blitz. I don't know who you're going to be covering, but you're going to get a blitz on the first play.
So here's where I have to sort of step in and be just a little bit of a jerk here for a moment. And this is one of those things that I think a lot of SEC fans, Georgia fans, South Carolina fans, Alabama fans, we may all be able to come together and agree on this, maybe even the A&M fans too, given the fact that it's Leon O'Neal who's sort of leading the charge on this. There is something about Clemson's sort of recruiting pitch that sometimes seems a little too good to be true to me. He's like good old boy Dabo Swinney. He's patting you on the back. He's he's everything the mamas and the daddies want. I sort of like Leon O'Neal taking this Clemson thing down a peg or two here. Yeah. Stop being such goody two-shoes in the recruiting trail. Clemson, they're going to love on you. Alabama and Georgia and some of these teams, they're all about winning at whatever cost. But good old boys over in Clemson, they're going to do what's right by you. They're not going to process you out of the program or anything like that. There is a part of me that sort of likes, if this is true, and Venables is making the same promise to multiple recruits here, and that's also different classes, so it's not necessarily mutually exclusive idea. But if Brent Venables is out here making a bunch of promises that he can't necessarily keep, there's sort of a part of me that enjoys him being called out on that. Am I wrong for feeling?
No, I think you're dead on. And there's no quicker way to endear yourself to a fan base than to pick on the non-conference opponent that's coming down to College Station. Here in what are we? 2 months away. That the Clemson's going to be showing up in College Station. There's nothing better. There's no quicker way to endear yourself to a fan base and say, listen, I might have just got on campus, but let me go ahead and tell you. Let me go ahead and clear the weeds on what's going on at Clemson right now. I absolutely love it. Kind of pulling some of these things back. You don't always get to hear these stories because usually they're not put out there on Twitter, but I absolutely love the fact that he's kind of going there in terms of this entire story.
All right, the Facebook comment section is a total mess. I apologize for not being able to follow those comments. Mine still come in like scrambled eggs. I don't know what to tell you. So I'm going to keep trying to see the Facebook comments as much as I can. I do want to hit a few comments on the YouTube comment section. If you don't mind, let me go back to the previous topic just for a moment because some pretty interesting stuff coming in on YouTube. Frank Bibbs and the notion that Jacob Copeland, who at one point in time was linked to Alabama, had some Tennessee stuff going on there at the end, ends up going to Florida. Frank Bibbs says Bama's going to regret that Jacob Copeland left them. G. Grace comes back and says, Frank, you're kidding me, dude. We got plenty of guys like Jacob Copeland. Morgan Recton says, I think on a different subject. I'm conflating his comment with something else, but there's essentially a Jacob Copeland conversation there about the SEC teams that did not get Copeland. I mean, how big of a win do you think this was for Florida, and how much will a program like Alabama or maybe even Tennessee regret not getting in on that?
I think that Jacob Copeland's going to be a good player. I don't know. To me, this is what's wrong, in my opinion, with Florida recruiting is the fact that Bama let him get away. This kid's from Florida. Like, I mean, obviously, I'm from Pensacola too, and I went to Alabama, but this kid's from Florida. Florida should be able to kind of put that up and say, hey, these are our guys. And so I think Jacob Copeland's going to be great. Do I think that Bama's going to be fine signing Jalen Waddle and some of the other wide receivers? Absolutely. I don't think that Bama per se particularly is going to have a problem with Jacob Copeland going down to Gainesville. But I do think he's going to be a very good player and somebody to be reckoned with for the next 4 years.
By the way, Bo Molinari loving what Leon O'Neal, Bo's a big Texas A&M fan. He loves O'Neal's statement about Clemson. He thinks that Clemson's going to lose in College Station. And that, I guess, Leon O'Neal's statement there, I'm not sure how much he plays in that early season game against Clemson. He may play a lot. I'm just not sure as of yet. Freshmen in the defensive secondary can sometimes be a little bit of a dicey ordeal there. But O'Neal's statement here about Brent Venables and, calling him a liar, I imagine we hear about that again come September.
I don't think there's any doubt. It's you're probably talking about a college game day game and a lot of different things going on surrounding it. I'm so excited because what are we, 2 weeks from SEC Media Days? These storylines are going to start popping up more and more, and starting to get closer to the season, you just start getting that little bit of taste of college football, and this is what it all starts with.
Austin Smith has a very funny comment in the Facebook comment section. I'm not going to read it out loud, but it's a pretty funny comment to kind of keep the recruiting talk going there. And with that in mind, let's switch over to item number 5 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I like lists. I like preseason predictions. I like all the fodder for a conversation that goes on this time of year. And ESPN, with its preseason top 25, recently came out with its thoughts on the most exciting player in each of these top 25 teams. And for Auburn, of all the SEC teams mentioned here, I thought the name for Auburn may be the most interesting of all. ESPN touting the recently turned wide receiver, Devin Barrett. Here is what ESPN writer Alex Scarborough says about Devin Barrett. It goes back to the Eli Stove injury from the spring, that if Eli Stove is not healthy, that's one of the wide receivers that did get hurt during spring practice, watch out for Devin Barrett's potential replacement, as a potential replacement. He may not have Stove's straight line speed, but his background as a running back could make him a lethal threat in the open field. That's Alex Scarborough from ESPN talking about Devin Barrett. This to me is interesting for a multitude of reasons. First of all, man, Auburn needs that wide receiver to step up. I don't know that Jarrett Stidham's ever had a really great wide receiver to throw to there at Auburn. In 2018, he needs one. I do think this is an offense for the Tigers that needs to stretch the field more vertically here. I think they did deal with a number of injuries during the spring, which makes that tougher. But Barrett stepping up as a guy that may be able to provide that opportunity for Auburn. I mean, if this is true, and if this ends up happening, the Auburn offense is a lot tougher to deal with that.
I don't think there's any doubt. And open field playmakers is something Auburn and Gus Malzahn really has kind of made their money on, right? Guys that you can get the ball to, that can get people out in space, that can make somebody miss, that can get up the field. Using that speed out wide has become something we've grown to know Gus Malzahn for. So whether it be Eli Stove or whether it be Nate Craig Myers or somebody else in that offense, I'm looking at a couple of the running backs for who I think are exciting, but I think it's definitely a different premise to look at. And by the way, they've got Auburn listed at number 19 there on their list of top 25 teams. I think that's the lowest I've seen Auburn ranked.
Probably lower than I would rank them.
Auburn at 19, I feel like that's a little bit of disrespect. And I'm not the guy out trying to respect Auburn, but number 19 on the list is tough for me.
But on the Devin Barrett subject, I don't know if you remember this. We actually talked about this a couple of months ago. And the point that I made during spring practice was, when Stove goes down, and they had the other receiver that ended up tearing up his knee too, when these guys go down with injury, one of the things that speaks to the strength of Auburn, relatively speaking, compared to some of the other SEC teams here is, it's able to slide in a guy like Devin Barrett, who had been recruited as a running back, but a 4-star player, a really coveted member of the 2017 class, sliding him over and putting him at wide receiver to give you that dynamic athletic dimension. It's the kind of luxury that Auburn has at its disposal that a lot of other SEC teams just don't necessarily have. And one of the reasons why I still am relatively high on Auburn as a program, I've sort of jokingly called them the Intercontinental champions of the SEC. They're not the world champs. They're not the main eventers like Georgia and Alabama.
Right, yeah.
But they're better than everybody else. It's the talent to have at your disposal of moving a Devin Barrett from running back to wide receiver that really speaks to what Gus Malzahn can do that right now a lot of other SEC coaches cannot do.
Yeah, and I think there's a level to this that we don't talk about in Gus Malzahn's really magistry of his roster. I mean, we can talk about, and Jartavius Whitlow's in the same thing, was a quarterback in high school, 2-star, kind of recruit quarterback, could end up being one of the starting running backs for Auburn this year. And this is, we look at Auburn every year, and it's like, right there around number 10 as far as recruiting goes. They're never a number 1 class, but they're number 30. And being able to find players like this who are multifaceted, multi-dimensional players on the football field, I think that's what Gus Malzahn's really built his career out of. Finding guys that can do more things within this offense has become a huge thing for them.
Speaking of Gus Malzahn, go back to 2017 for a moment. On the day that Devin Barrett officially signed his letter of intent with Auburn, Malzahn explained then what he likes about the guy that now may help him at wide receiver.
Devin Barrett, he was the number 1 running back on our board from the get-go. He was the one that we wanted. He's got a great vision. He's got great speed. He's got the ability to take it 80 on any given play. He can stretch the field down the field as far as catching the football. I really think he's got a chance to come in here and compete right off the bat. Very excited about Devin.
Yeah, so that's Gus Malzahn weighing in on Devin Barrett, and with him in mind, Trey Barnes in our Facebook comment section says that he thinks that Auburn has the most talented crop of wide receivers in the SEC. For me, I can't really go there with you because for the most part, these guys are unproven. You mentioned Nate Craig Myers a moment ago. I think he has a chance to be really good. I think the incoming freshman Matthew Hill may be a name to watch there for Auburn too. Yeah. But, overall, I'm not going to trade you Auburn's wide receivers for Alabama's. I think Alabama really is the most talented group of receivers in the SEC and really among the most talented in the country with Judy and Ruggs and Devontae Smith. That's a good group. I think the Florida receivers are pretty good with Copeland as a freshman. Van Jefferson transferred from Ole Miss. Tyree Cleveland, who I really like. That's a pretty good group. And really, for me, that's more of a proven group than what you really have at Auburn.
Yeah, no, I think that and listen, let's not forget about Ryan Davis at Auburn. Obviously, he's, multi-dimensional wide receiver, can do a ton of things. I also look at Ole Miss, who, listen, they had 2 wide receivers in the top 50 on SI.com's countdown, a couple of weeks ago, DK Metcalf and Brown over there when you talk about the receivers. I also look at, if you want to talk about unproven but still talented. LSU.
Yeah.
I mean, good Lord, the range and
the
speed of those guys.
Good names.
Absolutely unbelievable.
Grindhard, by the way, on the YouTube comment section says, BA is wrong. The Rebels have the best wide receiver room. Auburn is third. So it's kind of interesting that Grindhard's a little higher on Auburn. Honestly, I probably did overlook the Ole Miss group a little bit just because I don't think about them being all that consequential of an SEC team this season. But when one of your wide receivers is A.J. Brown, the rest of your group's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, no doubt. And also throwing love out there to, Jamie Blaine. I don't want to forget South Carolina. We did cover their wide receiver room, a couple of weeks ago, talking about Edwards and talking about Debo Samuel.
Yeah, that's at least a very good tandem. All right, item number 6 in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Our friends over at AL.com produced a commitment video for one of the top defensive linemen in the country for the class of 2020 and one of the top players in Alabama overall. It's Jason Jones is his name, and Jones in his commitment video, well, it's pretty entertaining, pretty well done here by AL.com, kind of a nice cinematic feel to it with the orchestral music that's used here. And on the way towards committing to Alabama, Jones takes a bit of a detour and a little troll job against Georgia here for a moment. I wonder if you tell me what you think about this. But first, here's a little snippet of the video just to sort of set us up for a conversation. Take a look at this.
And that's why it's time for me to make my own choice and find my new home. Go Dogs! Get out of the ball! Hold up. Y'all didn't think he was going to leave the state, did you? No. Roll Tide. Roll Tide.
I should point out here that I think this is a very good video. Well done. That's the comedian Funny Man that you see kind of coming up at the end there. The weird part about the Georgia trolling on this is, and listen, I'm not mad at it. I mean, for the most part, I think all is fair when it comes to
I probably have more of an issue than you do.
I've always just been sort of okay with this sort of, fun jabs back and forth. But Jason Jones is not even on the radar for most UGA fans. I mean, he's a very good player, but they've got their attention set on other defensive linemen for 2019 and 2020. So it's almost like it's a more interesting troll job if it's a player that had been more closely connected to Georgia leading up to his decision.
Right.
I don't even know that this date was on many UGA fans' calendars. Jones' ultimate, video drop there.
Yeah, no. Listen, I think that in the end, had this happened a year from now, that this, he'd have been on a lot more people's radar. The fact that he is a 2020 talent, even though he is the #1 player in the state of Alabama for next year, the fact that he's 2020, not many people were that focused on his commitment.
Yeah.
I think it tells you a little bit about UGA's coaching staff and how they felt about him. But I don't like it in the end. I really don't. Listen, I hope the guy's incredible. I hope he's a 3-time All-American in Alabama. But I don't love. And this, I said this last year with, I can't even remember who it was who ended up going to Georgia and tosses the Tennessee hat. I didn't like it back then. I don't like it when it's happening. For Alabama. I don't happen like it's. I don't like it.
The exact opposite.
Yeah.
I loved it when Quay Walker did it, so it'd be the height of hypocrisy. I was like, "Hey, Quay Walker's the best thing I've ever seen," but this kid's a jerk. Like you can't have it both ways.
I know. I don't like it.
You're either gonna hate it on both sides, or sort of be okay with it on both sides. And while I'm not glad he did it, I'm also not mad at him for doing it either.
I think it's a well done video, and I love Funny Mane Johnson. I mean, that guy. I've done a couple of different events with him. He is absolutely hilarious in person to watch, but. Listen, I think you focus on yourself, focus on what you control. Don't worry about any other schools.
So here's the one thing, and listen, I'm going to be a total fan when I say this, and I hope y'all appreciate the fact that I try to be very candid about this kind of stuff. As a fan of Georgia, what I do sort of appreciate the fact is Alabama's still a little worried about UGA, maybe. Still a little worried?
I don't know.
Still a little worried?
I don't know if this is Nick Saban putting the video in, but
dropping UGA into commitments here is maybe still kind of thinking about that.
I don't think there's any doubt. I don't. Listen, I'd love to sit there and say, hey man, Georgia's not even on Bama's radar. Hey, that #1 class in the country, it changed a lot of things going on in Tuscaloosa.
Casey Cochran says the troll job that we just saw there would have been more effective had it been a guy like Owen Pappoe, and that is true. I mean, now that's a hard thing to see when it's a player that you think that you do have a chance to get, and even though there have been a lot of online chatter about the 5-star linebacker Owen Pappoe that ultimately chose Auburn, even on the day that he announced, I was sort of not buying in any of that. I was thinking he was going to go to Georgia. If a guy like that does the double switch on you at that point in time, that's a lot harder to take than some guy that most Georgia fans haven't even heard of.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find it. I just lost it. Esteban Estevez said it's almost like that guy who got the Auburn tattoo and then turned around and flipped to Bama. That was Reuben Foster. That was Reuben Foster that had the Auburn tattoo.
Reuben Foster got an Auburn tattoo.
That was the Reuben Foster had the Auburn tattoo. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I might be wrong on that.
Yeah, so that's a good comment by Esteban there on that. Let's do item number 7 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And along the lines of what we mentioned earlier with the ESPN piece about the most exciting top 25, or I should say the exciting player on each of its preseason top 25 teams, running back from the Aggies getting some love here. Travion Williams is his name, and in the transition to the Jimbo Fisher era there in College Station, I do think there's going to be more emphasis put on the running game. Here is what ESPN writer Alex Scarborough had to say about Travion Williams. It's understandable if you lost Williams in the shuffle the past couple of seasons. There have been a bunch of good running backs in the SEC during that time. But sleeping on him and his combined 1,790 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 38 receptions is a mistake. I would say that if you're sleeping on Travion Williams, it's not so much about him getting lost in the shuffle of other good SEC backs. There have been plenty.
Yeah.
For me, it really kind of comes down to more about getting lost in the shuffle in a Texas A&M system that seemed to sort of be about, we always go back to the finesse card here. A little bit more interested in, the revolving door of transfer quarterbacks and things like that. I mean, I'm just going to trust Jimbo Fisher to use these running backs in a more effective way, build a bigger, more physical offensive line than what Kevin Sumlin was doing there. So Travion Williams wasn't a star before, but exciting for Aggies fans. I think he has a much greater chance of being a household name playing as a part of this Jimbo Fisher offense because, Fisher just makes stars of these kinds of players.
And he makes stars out of running backs that look just like Travion Williams. I mean, this is not your typical 240-pound bruising back that comes in there with a thunder and lightning combination. I mean, the way that he was able to bring along Dalvin Cook, I think it looks to me a lot like what you're going to see out of Travion Williams in this system. I think that, listen, you're not, like I said, you're not talking about a bruising back. I mean, I think Travion Williams is probably 200 pounds at his max right now, but this is a guy who can take the top off that defense as a running back. And so I think that gives you a lot of different issues if you're defensive coordinators. A guy that is that speedy out of the backfield that can also run between the tackles is going to be dangerous for Jimbo Fisher.
Yeah, I just think that there is a a transformation occurring at Texas A&M. And I think, calling Travion Williams exciting from ESPN is an example of what we might see here. It's that improved physicality on defense. And I know there are a lot of Aggies fans who have been waiting for guys like Dalen Mack and some of those guys to have that light really come on for them in a big way here in 2018. But all that for me goes back to Jimbo Fisher. And if I'm a Texas A&M fan, and you know that I have sort of a complicated opinion on the Aggies, I think eventually Jimbo's going to do really well and he's going to win a lot of games. I don't know that you see that necessarily unfold in 2018. I'm sort of high on them long term, a little wait and see short term. But if I was a Texas A&M fan, here's what I'd be rooting for: individual performances.
Yeah.
Show me examples of Jimbo getting more into this guy than the previous coaching staff did. If that happens, that's going to make me feel much better about the long-term future, because for a lot of these SEC coaches, Gus Malzahn notwithstanding, who won the league in his first year in 2013, it's that year 2 jump where you really see some big stuff start to happen.
Yeah, and listen, I think that you are, and it's unfortunate to say to Texas A&M fans, but I think you are going to find yourself in that Kevin Sumlin boat of where you're getting 8, 9 wins along the way. I don't know that you get to 10 in the regular season for Texas A&M this year, but I think somebody gets shocked along the way. And honestly, I'm hoping it's not Alabama. Maybe it's them beating LSU for the first time since they've been in the SEC. Maybe it's them beating an Auburn football team. Maybe it's somebody else. But to me, the mark for Jimbo in year 1 is going to be beating somebody that you were not supposed to beat somewhere along the way. But I still think at the end of the year they do find themselves in that 9-win category.
On YouTube, Morgan Recton says, I hope Jimbo is a bust. Now, Morgan's a Florida fan, so maybe he dislikes him going back to his time at Florida State. But I've said before, Jimbo is one of those, very unpopular SEC coaches for the most part. 98 Sports Talk also asks a good question. Will there be a live July 4th SEC Country Live show? We are taking the day off tomorrow, a holiday tomorrow. We will not be here, but then back again on Thursday in our normal time. So no SEC Country Live tomorrow for the 4th of July. We're going to let the folks who will work with us every day enjoy some time with their friends and family. But we will see you for a live edition of the show again on Thursday at 3 p.m.
I'm going to pull a Cliff Nelson birthday. I'm going to get the grill fired up.
You're going to be fired up?
I'm going to get the beers ready. I'm going to do a couple of different things.
So my consecutive streak of not being invited over continues then, I guess.
Yeah, sorry, man. My grill ain't big enough. 2 steaks for me.
I have never heard that as an excuse for why you're not inviting somebody over.
All right, man.
Sorry, the grill's not
grill's
big
only
enough.
big enough for 2 people. So.
That's really funny. All right, item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Speaking of excitement in the SEC, another guy that could potentially provide that is South Carolina wide receiver / kick returner Deebo Samuel. He's also a guy that got some of the attention from the folks at ESPN. Here's the write-up on Samuel, why he ranks as the Gamecocks' most exciting player. Once again, Alex Scarborough says Samuel is simultaneously one of the best receivers in the SEC, as well as one of the best return specialists in the conference, if not the best. Now, I've always said that, for me, that's one of the things that makes Deebo Samuel such an interesting prospect. He can do both. He can be the kick returner and he can be the wide receiver. But at a certain point in time, is this too much love for this guy? When he's healthy, I think he's an impact player. But, man, he's going to line up a long way away from the ball at the receiver position. The special teams stuff has been regulated out of the game by the rule book here. I like Deebo. I think he makes a big impact this season. But, boy, he's getting a lot of offseason.
He's getting a lot of praise.
You're
leading the parade, man.
I started it. Everybody else is following suit.
Listen, I love Deebo Samuel. To me, there's so many questions surrounding what Deebo Samuel will bring to this football team this year. It's not just the injury to me. It's also the change in offensive philosophy, offensive coordinators. What are you really going to get? What is Jake Bentley really in the end? How good is the offensive line? How good is their running game? I think Deebo's great. And I do think when you talk about versatility and what all he brings to the table, that it's warranted. I think he's going to be a great player in the SEC. I think he's going to be a great player in the NFL. But to me, it's throttling back just a little bit. We talked, a couple of weeks ago, maybe the possible number 3 pick in the draft.
Yeah.
A little bit too early for that for me.
98 Sports Talk on YouTube also says that Deebo Samuel's got to stay healthy, and that's obviously the issue for everybody. But if you're a wide receiver and you're at that kick returner position, and listen, if he's just a wide receiver, we're not talking about Deebo Samuel every day. He's a good receiver.
Right.
We're not talking about him as a receiver every day if that's all that he is. It's that extra field position or breaking one long score for a touchdown.
Yeah.
That's what makes him super valuable. But as 98 Sports Talk points out, does that also make him more vulnerable to injury because of the fact that, when everybody else is taking those fair catches inside the 25, Deebo Samuel's going to be trying to run everything out to see if he can get himself a little extra yardage. Does that make him more of a threat to get hurt?
I think it does. And it's not saying that he will get injured. Obviously, I think his injury was a fluke injury in a couple of different ways last year. But listen, you are going to have Deebo Samuel, and it's what he means to the team. Listen, I think Will Muschamp understands it. When you did beat NC State last year, but you got outgained by twice as much offensive production, it was because of Deebo Samuel. It was because of those returns and his ability to kind of take the top off with those quick strikes. So I do think that Will Muschamp understands that and is going to ask Deebo Samuel to do a lot for that team.
Jamie Blanton says, here's where Mike says, if you're dependent on Deebo Samuel, you can't block. This is where Mike is wrong. An offensive coordinator that doesn't run up the middle 70% on third down, whether long or short, use entire halves of football to protect the lead, is going to make a big difference here, along with the kicking game. That has been repaired. So it sounds like Jamie Blanton is really glad that the Kurt Roper era is over there in Columbia.
Yeah, no, I didn't say that, though, Jamie. So what else you got to come at me with? I think the Deebo's great. I am just telling you, I'm just pulling it back just a little bit.
I'm just thankful somebody's finally picking on Mike for change as opposed to always taking shots at me.
Jamie's been showing up, man.
For me, that's a really refreshing
basis.
change of pace. All right, item number 9 here on SEC Country Live in our first and 10 list. Quick story. The nation's #1 wide receiver for the class of 2019 is Jadon Haselwood. He's from Atlanta, Georgia, and he is currently a Georgia commitment, although Haselwood has a bit of a wandering eye. He does enjoy taking his visits, both official, which he has planned coming up, and unofficial, which he has taken multiple times to places like Auburn. Now, I had a chance to interview Jadon Haselwood a couple of months ago about going other places and being elsewhere other than Athens, the place that he's publicly stated he plans on playing his college ball. Here is the explanation he gave then for why it is he likes to take visits.
I'm in the process of scheduling my officials right now. Like, I'm taking my first one in April to Oklahoma, of course. I mean, but that doesn't change my opinion on Georgia. Like, I see fans commenting like, someone told me respect the fans and we'll respect you or something like that. And I just looked at it and was like, man, y'all don't understand. You only can do it one time.
You only can do it one time. You can only go through these visits. He mentions Oklahoma right there, which he has, a bit of a tie to. But the school that he's visited most often lately, as I said, was Auburn. And at the opening, which takes place this week in Frisco, Texas, there at the Dallas Cowboys complex, AL.com catches up with Haselwood about his interest in Auburn and kind of what that means for the status of his Georgia commitment. Here is what Haselwood told AL.com about all these visits to Auburn and what's going on here. Right now, he says, Georgia, that's still my school. I'm not going to change on them. You can't help but notice the word yet here. I'm not going to change on them yet. If I do right now, everything is all solid. So that's Jadon Haselwood saying, listen, I want to take my visits, got no plans to make a change, not changing on them yet. Do you see a reason that Georgia fans will be worried about Haselwood?
It's spelled out right in front of you. The word yet right there kind of jumps off the page like you were just saying. I don't think they should be worried. Now, I do find it interesting. Did he just bring up that he's going on a visit to Oklahoma? Now, I would love to know what that conversation's like between Lincoln Riley. Boy, you don't want to go play against
the way we started our show today.
Yeah, you don't want to go play against those defenses in the SEC. Come with this pass-happy Big 12. We'll make you a star out here. I think there's reason for concern. But I think if you're a Georgia fan right now, you relax and you lean on what Kirby's been able to do on the recruiting trail. I think it speaks for themselves. Yeah. And right now, to be honest with you, I know that Jadon Haselwood is going to be at the top of the list in terms of this class for Georgia. But Georgia's starting to get into that territory where it's like, you know what, if you don't want to come here, that's on you. If you don't want to be a part of this, that's on you.
Hold on.
They are.
Hold on. But I certainly agree that Georgia is recruiting at a level in which that it can replace virtually anybody that it loses. But Georgia really needs wide receivers, and this is the nation's #1 wide receiver. This is not so much if you want to go other place, we got 5 guys just as good as you to take your place. Georgia would, I don't think Georgia's going to lose Haselwood, and I'll explain why in a moment. If Georgia were to lose Haselwood, that'd really sting.
Well, I know it would sting.
That would really
and I'm not saying Georgia.
And I don't mean symbolically. I mean, that's a tough guy to replace.
I'm not saying Georgia looks at him and say, boy, we'll just replace you.
Yeah.
I don't think that at all. But I think Georgia's getting to that spot where it's like, hey, if you don't want to play for us, we don't want you to come play for us either.
Well, luckily, I don't think that Georgia fans have too much to worry about in that regard. I think that Haselwood still very much wants to be a part of the Georgia program. In fact, in a recent episode of my program, Dog Nation Daily, Dog Nation's recruiting insider Jeff Sentell, a guy who knows Haselwood personally, knows him very well, sort of laid out the scenario for why he thinks, even with the visits to Auburn and Oklahoma and everywhere else, ultimately Haselwood will still be UGA bound. Here is Jeff Sentell.
Jadon is doing exactly what he said he was going to do. He's going to take his visits. He's felt he's earned the right. He's going to give other schools a chance to recruit him. And that's going to be interpreted different ways as other schools have a chance. To put it very succinctly, Brandon, if there's ever a need for Georgia to start worrying, it would be when the Bulldogs don't have a lot of success on the field. They don't throw the ball well this fall. They rely on the ground game. Justin Fields is not in the game or not performing well for the Bulldogs. I think it's going to take a lot to move Jaden Hazelwood away from Georgia. He knows what Georgia has at receiver. He knows what they have at quarterback. And he knows what they have on the offensive line. He knows the running backs that are in that stable as well. He knows he will have a great chance to get single coverage in a lot of times in the SEC, and he knows what he can do with single coverage.
So if you're a Georgia fan, you hear Jeff Sentell there. There's a lot to like about what Sentell views as Hazelwood's continued relationship with Georgia, but you can't help but also notice that there's a need for Georgia to maintain and earn that commitment throughout the play of the 2018 season. See his buddy Justin Fields on the field. See Georgia throwing the football. These are things that, based on what Jeff Sentell says there, that Hazelwood's still going to be looking for.
Yeah, no, and I think that's how recruiting always tends to play out, right? When you're in the summer and you're getting commitments, it's who's building steam, who's number one class, who's doing all these things. But as it goes, you do have to see some of these teams keep the status quo, stay out in front of the SEC East. And I think that's why it becomes such a big year for Dan Mullen down there at Florida. Hey, listen, we can actually win some games down here. That's the only way for him to get the class turned around.
Bull Gator in our comment section says, of course that Auburn can flip a commit from Georgia. We've certainly seen Auburn win with Owen Popo over Georgia a couple of months ago, and over the course of its history, Auburn certainly had plenty of success recruiting inside the state of Georgia. This is one of those head-to-head battles to watch here for the class of 2019. Georgia trying to defend its own turf in Atlanta against a program like Auburn that wants to come in and gain a big-time wide receiver prospect. Item number 10 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Barrett Sallee, our buddy, who's he actually even been on SEC Country Live before, writing for CBS Sports Now, though. I thought he had kind of an interesting piece, and maybe at some point in time we'll talk more about this, but he looked at the best team in each SEC program's history. For Alabama, I believe it was the 2011 team.
I'm upset.
That's right, the 2009 team gets omitted here. Georgia's 1980 team gets mentioned. Auburn's 2010. Florida's 96. Any problems with this list? And you say you think your team should have gotten some consideration?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a ton of the history about some of the other programs, some of the great teams that have come along. But I do have a problem looking at a team in 2009 that I was on that went undefeated, that had a Heisman Trophy winner, that beat, I think it was something crazy, 10 bowl teams that year, 9 ranked teams at the time he played them. 2011 team had a little bit of a loss. LSU we've talked about on the show a couple of times. I don't know, man.
That's a pretty strong case for the 2009 team. I think that you may be onto something there. The other point I made about Georgia is, obviously, as some of our commenters like to point out every single day, it's been a long time since Georgia's had a consensus national champion. The 1980 team would have been that for Georgia. But I'm not quite so sure that's the best team in Georgia's history. Had some close wins that season. They won them all, undefeated in every game. A lot of close wins. Georgia had the relatively ugly loss to Auburn this past year, but blew out a lot of teams. I'm not quite so sure if you did a computer simulation. I don't think the 1980 Georgia team beats this past year's Georgia team.
Yeah, it's tough, too. Yeah, your buddy Buck Bellew, right? The quarterback for the
quarterback for
there's so many different ones, too. I mean, there's a lot to look at.
Real quickly here, you taking the Urban Meyer version of Florida, or are you taking the Steve Spurrier version of Florida?
I think, I saw Urban Meyer's up front in physical right there a couple of times.
That 2008 Florida team, I have a hard time believing the 96 Florida team was better than 2008.
That 2008 team was good. Brandon Spikes, Carlos Dunlap, I mean, good Lord. They had it all.
Good stuff from Barrett Sallee there at CBS Sports. All right, here on SEC Country Live, we're always looking to close the show the same way every day. We're always looking for champions of life. Today, our champions of life come from the ranks of broadcasters here, and Freezing Cold Takes, the Twitter account you may have seen, did a good job of capturing this from ESPN's telecast last night. They're broadcasting the Nationals-Red Sox game. Rick Porcello is the pitcher for the Red Sox, and he's playing in a National League ballpark, so he's doing something that he essentially never does. He's hitting. But he's not just hitting, he's hitting against Max Scherzer, one of the top pitchers in all of baseball. And, well, safe to say the ESPN broadcasters thought Porcello, the inexperienced hitter, had no chance here. And, man, were they proven wrong. This is a great video. ESPN does it, but Freezing Cold Takes captures it. Take a look at this. This is very funny.
This was a battle right here. I mean, this is unfair right now.
Let's lock in here. All right, pitcher versus pitcher. When Porcello goes deep, you're going to realize that he's vindicated.
Alex Cora kind of facetiously told us that's going to be a great at bat, and he implied that he would tell Porcello, "Don't even swing. It's not. There's no point in that. He's too good."
Porcello's going to get his buddy here.
As long as you have a bat in your hand, you never know what can happen. But in this case, I think we know.
Porcello making contact and drives that ball to left. That is out of the reach of Juan Soto. One run will score.
How about
Two
this
runs
for
will
Rick
score.
Porcello? After the announcers, I mean, they just built up the idea that he's got no chance to do this. So I think the bottom line here is don't let anybody tell you you can't do anything. Whatever you put your mind to, you can achieve.
No,
is that the takeaway?
I agree wholeheartedly with that. So it's good. You know, those guys both actually came up together in the I think Tigers organization. So it's fun to watch that.
It is fun to watch that. I hope it's been fun to watch us here today. We'll have the podcast up for you for those of you that prefer listening. Right after the show is done, you can check that out on whatever podcast channel you prefer. As we said before, we'll be off tomorrow in honor of the Independence Day holiday. Hope you have some great fun with your family and friends. But we'll see you back here again on Thursday for another episode of SEC Country Live at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Y'all enjoy the holiday. We'll talk to you then.